Almighty God, touch my lips of clay that my words may not be merely my words, that you can reach into my heart and into my mind and into my soul, and place there the gems, the pearls which you would have us hear and understand. This I ask in your many names. Amen. Discipleship is one of those ultra-religious words which I heard growing up from religious people. And I really didn't have a clue what it meant. I knew that there were disciples because I read about them. We used to have scripture at school when I was a little boy, about 6 years old, and I'd sit there and I'd listen to it all, and it was extremely interesting. But it was very hard to see it as anything other than a nice elderly lady telling me stories about something that I didn't really understand. And I knew that there were disciples. So when I finally came back to the church, I thought of those disciples. And really and truly, the Church of England doesn't really go much further than that. There's not a lot of teaching about discipleship in the Church of England. And there's altogether too much teaching about the wrong sort of discipleship. Because to many people who come from a doctrinal position, discipleship is really and truly obeying what you're told by your pastor, by your bishop, or by your pope. Discipleship doesn't have a lot to do with an organic process of growth and development. But that is discipleship. That is the discipleship which I am going to preach about today, and the discipleship which this church teaches. It is a discipleship that begins with a spark which is in each and every one of your hearts. It has to come from that initial spark. I used a lot of theological words the last time I preached, and one of those was theophany. And a theophany is a moment of revelation. Another word for it is epiphany, which means outshining, epiphanos. The light is coming out. Now, a theophany is when we have an experience of God in our lives. Now, this is not something that we often speak about to one another, except in ultra-religious circles, in holy circles. It's not something that I talk frequently to my parents, or to my relatives, or to my neighbors about. Human language breaks down when we are in the presence of God. Much of the reason why we are embarrassed to speak about that which is most intimate, and most astonishing, and most transforming in our lives is because really and truly we don't have words to describe it. We had a theology group on Wednesday, and it was an extraordinary group. I had a fear that it might turn into a theology lecture. But on the contrary, I was the one that got lectured. I was the one who learned things. It was a lot of deep conversation and a lot of really rich theological language, because what we were trying to do was wrestle with concepts which it is almost impossible to pass on to other human beings. And frequently we worry that because we've had an experience which doesn't stand up in words, it's not valid. Just because we are unable to describe something that has happened to us does not mean to say that it is not authentic and valid and extraordinary and divine. So discipleship often starts off with that spark of the divine, that meeting that somebody has at some point during their life with something which they are frequently speechless in front of. Testimony is obviously often the best way to get at these concepts. And even though I've told you my testimony of how I came back to a relationship with God many, many times, I'm going to tell it again. There's a deathly silence in this church. I only have 2 bottles and one of them's empty, so it's not going to go on for too long. I was invited to the church where I came back to a relationship, a knowing relationship with God, because of course I'd always had a relationship with God. It had just been a little bit one-sided. Very one-sided. It was like cuddling someone when they're asleep. They don't know you're cuddling them, but you are cuddling them. Your affection is still being poured out upon them. Your love is still being poured out upon them. The fact that they're unconscious makes no never you mind. Well, I was unconscious. I was still in a relationship with God, but it was a very one-sided relationship. So I went to this church, and I was deeply and profoundly suspicious of religion in all its forms. I had been wounded and stung like so many people. But I thought, well, I shall go along because I'd heard some fairly outrageous stories about the clergy, and I thought, well, if they are that open-minded about the sort of people that go to church, and there were a whole bunch of gay folks that went to this church, well, perhaps there'll be a place for me, I thought. Perhaps I will find somewhere without judgment. Well, I went along, and it was an extraordinary evening. There was a whole bunch of extreme ceremonial going on. The service was a pontifical benediction and procession and veneration of the relic of the one true cross. Now, this was in a backstreet church in King's Cross, which is a red light district in North London. The contrast was startling. You walked from King's Cross station to this church through an area which had been economically very depressed for a long time. People are asking you for money, and they're offering you things which you never thought you were going to be offered on your way to church. You say, no, thank you very much, ma'am. Or, no, thank you, sir. Or whatever. And you went into the church. And of course, there was a whole lot going on. There was a lot of entertainment things going on. There was beautiful music. There were all the things that frequently get folk into a church, but they aren't the things that make a church. They will attract people in exactly the same way that you may be attracted to go to a concert. It's wonderful. It's rewarding. You enjoy the music. You can get fired up. You can get enthused. But that's not what makes a church. There was something in the building which drove me to my knees and drove tears to my eyes, even though it had been 15 years before I'd ever dared to think about a relationship with God. There was something there. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. There was something in the building besides the people in the building. And as much as I would like to be able to strip away the supernatural content in my faith, because the intellectual side of me has a big issue with it. The intellectual side of me has always been extremely suspicious of that whole mystical side of human experience of God. I can't do it. Authentically, there's no way I can do it because it was a supernatural experience. It was a metaphysical experience. It was an experience of the divine that I had. It was what I've come to describe in the same way that the Victorians used to talk about it. It was the vision glorious. It was something that I glimpsed. And it was only a brief glimpse, but I knew it was enough to keep me chasing it for the rest of my life. So far, that was in 1996, and I am still actively pursuing that same vision. And I think discipleship, frequently, for many people, starts with that vision glorious. But you know, for each individual, it is going to work itself out differently. As I've told many of you, I am having a very, very long-running discussion with a young friend of mine in North London. It's almost like a battle for someone's soul with the forces of darkness. Every now and again, I will get a long Facebook message, which is obviously taken straight from the Catholic Encyclopedia. Or it's directly cut and paste from the latest promulgation from the Vatican. It is hard-line doctrine. There is no shades of grey. It is black and white, and trust me, if you don't adhere to every single jot and tittle of this doctrine, you shall burn everlastingly. Now, of course, the good way to come back at that, and the way I have done again and again and again, have said, well, you know, if this is literally true, what you're telling me, then everybody except a few million very, very, very obedient Roman Catholics are going to be downtrodden. The vast majority of the world is lost. There has to be more to it than that. So I described in my latest long reply to him this morning the fact that Christianity has to be worked out by each individual. Now that